Good afternoon. It's Monday, July 27th. I'm Laura Cornfield, and this is IBA News, broadcasting from Jerusalem. We open with the largest ever business acquisition by an Israeli company. Teva Pharmaceutical Industries signed an agreement to purchase the generic drugs division of Allergan for a total of $40.5 billion in cash and stocks. The Dublin-based Allergan will receive over $33 billion in cash, as well as Teva shares valued at nearly $7 billion. The strategic acquisition brings together two of the world's leading drug companies and is expected to result in more affordable access to quality medicines while creating significant financial benefits for Teva's stockholders. The signing means that Teva will withdraw from plans to purchase the Mylan drug manufacturer. Teva's shares were suspended this morning on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange pending the announcement. Bloomberg's Ruth David explains the financial implications of the deal.
Just give us a sense of why Allergan is doing this now.
And what a busy weekend it's been. But so, to just quickly recap, so the CEO of Allergan, Brent Saunders, is a guy who's known more for his expertise in branded healthcare. And this will give him a chance to focus on that and sort of sell the generics business, which has slightly lower profit margins. So you're looking at, say, 50% profit margin compared to around 80% for branded healthcare. And for Teva, it's just great news, right? Because it gives them more bargaining power now, the world's largest generics company. When they're sitting across the table with governments, when they're sitting across the table with private companies, it just gives them more negotiating power. And this deal has been so much smoother compared to the 4-month, very public, very acrimonious process for Mylan, which now it can get out of.
And that's critically important. This is about walking away from something which was going to be filled with acrimony, as you say, trying to do a deal.
Yes.
They've already said they're going to save, what, $1.4 billion from this deal.
Absolutely.
They've guided us in terms of how they're going to split the deal up. Just talk us through some of the nuances that you've seen so far from them.
Yeah, so, and it's going to be a deal where they're spending most of the money, so about $34 billion is coming in cash and the rest of it is in stock. And also there was some chatter about, because it's not an antagonistic deal, they've got in a way with paying slightly less, whereas their offer for Mylan was similar numbers. But if you look at just how much Mylan makes in revenues per year, it's about $6.5 billion compared with $8.4 billion for the generics business of Allergan. So from the look of it, it seems like a slightly bigger business, which they're paying a similar price for. And, one thing to keep in mind is Teva's head of generics now is a former Actavis/Allergan man. So this kind of probably would have made it slightly easier, right? And it also now gives Mylan renewed push for its acquisition attempts at Perrigo. So who knows? Maybe we're going to see more deals in the next weeks to come.
And actually, and this goes to the point that actually healthcare and M&A have really gone hand in hand this year.
Absolutely.
Right? And we'll see more possibly in the next couple of weeks.
A Palestinian man died while fleeing from security forces this morning in the Kalandia refugee camp north of Jerusalem. The man, who was suspected of planning a terror attack, escaped under the roof of the building when he realized that an arrest was in progress. During the chase, he was shot in the leg by a border policeman and fell to his death when trying to jump onto the roof of an adjacent building. An accomplice who was with the fugitive at the time was detained for questioning. Jordan has issued a condemnation of Israeli actions yesterday relating to maintaining order on the Al-Aqsa Mosque Temple Mount complex. The Jordanian information minister condemned what he called the storming of Al-Aqsa by Jewish settlers. They specifically denounced Agriculture Minister Uri Ariel, who visited the site to recite Tisha B'Av prayers as the Jewish people mourn the destruction of the holy temples which once stood on the mount. There were violent confrontations during the day between Muslim rioters and Israeli police and Palestinians who were preparing to throw stones and other debris from the mount onto Jewish worshippers at the Western Wall. Internal Security Minister Gilad Erdan rejected the Jordanian criticism and praised the efforts of the police to maintain order despite provocations from Arab rioters. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas says he will step down in 2 months because of health issues, specifically due to fatigue. Channel 1 News reported last night. Abbas, who is 80, has notified the PLO Central Committee of his decision and met with Chief PA negotiator Saib Arakat, who is seen as his likely successor. Abbas recently appointed Arakat to the post of Secretary General of the PLO. Abbas has threatened to resign numerous times in the past, only to change his mind and remain on the job. Nimar Hamad, a political advisor to Abbas, dismissed this report as Israeli rumors, which he said the PA has become accustomed to hearing. Hamad said this was part of an Israeli attempt to disrupt the work of the PA leadership. Channel 1 also reported that an unnamed senior Israeli minister, believed to be Interior Minister Sivan Shalom, recently met in Amman with Arakat. IBA's Eli Wagalanter was in the Knesset this morning and asked a couple of observers if they believed the rumor.
I don't know if this thing will be is a serious and or it's true. But I think that Abu Mazen want to say that he not despair. He is disappointed from the Israeli governments and especially from the Prime Minister Netanyahu because there is no peace process, there is no real negotiations, and that he said that he wanted to resign. This indicates that Abu Mazen is disappointed. Abu Mazen said there is no peace process, and he accused Netanyahu in this.
I wouldn't take this too seriously. He's resigned a number of times. Everybody in the Palestinian framework resigns periodically, and it's a way of staying in the headlines. We're talking about this now. Otherwise, nobody's talking about him. We're talking about Daesh, we're talking about Sinai, we're talking about Syria, we're talking about Iraq, we're talking about Israeli internal issues. We're talking about Iran, of course, and the Netanyahu-Obama ongoing fight. But we're not talking about Palestinians, and I'm talking about Abbas in particular. Hamas is also making moves towards some sort of rapprochement with Israel, perhaps. So he's got to get himself back in the headlines. That's, I think, what this is about. Peace process is something that's, in any case, getting all sorts of different approaches right now. So I think we have to be careful about the kind of language that we use. Is there going to be, it's mostly about internal Palestinian competition between, on the one hand, the Fatah faction Abbas heads and Hamas, which is moving towards some sort of more acceptable position around the world, and he's trying to fend that off.
Zionist Union MK Chilik Bar, the head of the Knesset's Two States for Two Peoples caucus, revealed his new diplomatic framework today. The plan calls for recognizing a Palestinian state in the UN and then negotiating borders while involving the Arab League in talks. Bar's peace plan calls for 1967 borders plus land swaps in exchange for settlement blocks. According to the proposal, settlers can choose to stay under Palestinian sovereignty. Zionist Union head Isaac Herzog said moving forward will be difficult, but we must try to make the vision of Isaiah, beating swords into plowshares, come true. Herzog accused Prime Minister Netanyahu of wanting to bury initiatives and leave the situation as is, and reiterate that there is no partner. All signs indicate that convicted U.S. spy Jonathan Pollard will be released later this year. U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch has said that after nearly 3 decades, Pollard has served enough time in prison. We have more in this report from Ari O'Sullivan.
Jonathan Pollard is certainly counting the days until his release from Butler Prison in late November, pending a parole board review. Washington has been dismissing reports that Pollard's freedom was in some way linked to the nuclear deal with Iran. U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch says it was a legal issue and nothing more.
When Mr. Pollard was sentenced some 30 years ago, I believe he received a life sentence, but at the time, the system still provided for parole, and under the operation of law, after 30 years, it is a mandatory operation of parole.
Lynch clarified that the Justice Department would not interfere with the process of releasing Pollard. She dismissed any link to the recently signed nuclear deal with Iran, saying it was ridiculous.
It would have been extremely far-thinking of people 30 years ago to sentence Mr. Pollard and set this mandatory release date to coincide with the Iran deal. And if they were able to pull that off, I'd be quite impressed.
The release of the former naval intelligence analyst is no longer the dynamite issue it once was in the United States. It may even help politically.
What you've seen is a softening from the U.S. intelligence community about the need for him to continue to stay in jail. Some people haven't softened on that, but some people have. And what some officials believe is that this comes at a useful time to release him because it would be seen as doing something to make Israel happy at a time when Israel is already very unhappy about the deal with Iran.
There'll be pushback in the Congress.
Yes, I think there will be some, but you know, given our attention spans, how many members of Congress have ever heard the name Jonathan Pollard? Really.
It's a long time.
Yeah, it's been a long time. The issue has not been in the news. Maybe it's because of my own life, but I'm a great believer in redemption, my friends. And I think that Jonathan Pollard has regretted and what he did. And so...
it's time.
Yeah.
The Daily Yediot Achronot quotes a senior Israeli diplomatic source as saying the Americans would likely ban Pollard from coming to Israel for fear he would be received with a hero's welcome. Israeli legal sources tell IBA that this is actually feasible. Ariel O'Sullivan for IBA News.
Republican presidential candidate Mike Huckabee, an ardent supporter of Israel, has come under a storm of criticism for a Holocaust reference he made on radio, claiming that the Iranian nuclear deal is marching Israel to the door of the oven. This is how it was reported on CNN.
As members of U.S. Congress continue to consider the nuclear deal that the U.S. and 5 other world powers just brokered with Iran, GOP presidential hopeful and former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee expressed he really doesn't like it, using strong language, in fact. Let me read you a quote now from a radio interview Huckabee gave Breitbart News. Huckabee saying this, and I'm quoting, "This president's foreign policy is the most feckless in American history. It is so naive that he would trust the Iranians. By doing so, he will take the Israelis and march them to the door of the oven," end quote. I'm joined now on the phone by CNN Global Affairs correspondent Elise Labott. So what's the reaction from these words?
Well, Fred, the reaction, I think people are really going to be very considered about speaking first about this. I haven't heard any reaction from the administration. Let's unpack what Mike Huckabee said. I mean, in saying that this is marching Israeli to the oven, it's evoking language of the Holocaust, imagery and a metaphor of something that actually happened to millions of Jews. And I think, you know, for Huckabee to be placing this at the feet of President Obama, we really haven't even heard language like that from Prime Minister Netanyahu. I mean, certainly there's very strong feelings about this Iran deal, not only from Israel, but from Americans, members of Congress, U.S. allies in the Gulf, and, you know, pros and cons on each side about the strength of the deal and whether it really curbs Iran's nuclear ambitions. And Israel has called, you know, Iran an existential threat, meaning it's a threat to Israel's existence if Iran were to have a nuclear weapon. But I've never heard the Israelis say that President Obama and the administration would be causing another Holocaust or a genocide if that deal were to go through.
Huckabee's comment drew condemnation from the Democratic National Committee, the National Jewish Democratic Council, and the Anti-Defamation League. The Jewish Democrats accused Huckabee of callous disregard for the memory of Holocaust victims. ADL Director Jonathan Greenblatt said, "Whatever one's views of the nuclear agreement, the suggestion that President Obama is leading Israel to another Holocaust is completely out of line and unacceptable." Syrian President Bashar Assad made his first comments on the Iranian nuclear deal, praising Tehran for showing strength despite pressure from the world powers. In his first public speech in a year, Assad said that Iran should be admired as the leader in the Islamic world in terms of nuclear production and industry, despite the siege it has been under for so long. Assad also addressed the civil war that has been raging in his country and praised Hezbollah for its support, but emphasized that no one could replace the Syrian army in the fighting. Assad expressed confidence that his army could win the war, although he acknowledged his troops had lost territory to rebel forces and were running short on manpower. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif is on a 3-nation tour aimed at deepening ties with Arab neighbors following the conclusion of the Islamic Republic's nuclear deal with world powers. Saudi Arabia and other Sunni-ruled Gulf states hold deep suspicions about Iran's intentions in the region. While the Western allied Arab countries are cautiously hopeful the nuclear deal will reduce the chances Iran will acquire an atomic bomb, they also fear an easing of international pressure will embolden the Shiite states' ambitions at a time of heightened sectarian tensions in the region. Zarif began his tour with a stop in Kuwait, where he held talks with Emir Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed Al Sabah. Zarif's trip also includes stops in Qatar and Iraq. He's briefing officials in all 3 countries on the nuclear accord and discussing ways to improve cooperation and fight terrorism. Turkey attacked Kurdish insurgent camps in Iraq for a second straight night, as Ankara called for a special NATO meeting on Tuesday to discuss its security concerns, after 2 soldiers were killed and 4 wounded in an earlier attack by PKK militants. A somewhat reluctant member of the U.S.-led coalition against Islamic State, Turkey made a dramatic turnaround this week by granting the alliance access to its air bases and launching air raids of its own against both the Islamic State and the PKK. The renewed conflict between Turkey and the PKK has sparked protests among Kurds in Turkey. A police officer was killed in clashes following the death of a leftist activist during police raids on suspected militants. Last night, clashes broke out after the funeral of the protester. Back here at home, it will soon be easier to get medical marijuana in your local pharmacy. Deputy Health Minister Yaakov Litzman announced today that pharmacies will be stocked with medical marijuana in order to ease the often arduous bureaucratic process faced by patients with prescriptions. During an address to the Knesset Committee on Drug and Alcohol Abuse, Litzman said the current system of dispensing the substance was unbalanced. According to Litzman, pharmacies give out all kinds of narcotic drugs, including morphine, and it's done in an orderly fashion, so marijuana will be handled the same way as other medications. Prominent Rabbi Ezra Sheinberg was indicted today on 13 counts of sexual assault. The rabbi is alleged to have forced himself upon women who came seeking his blessing. The 47-year-old rabbi is the former head of the Orot HaAri Yeshiva in Tzfat. In addition to the sexual charges, Sheinberg is also charged with obstructing the judicial proceedings against him. The state is asking that he be detained until the end of his trial. Sheinberg was caught at Ben Gurion Airport on July 1st as he was attempting to leave the country. 3 people were killed and 2 others badly injured yesterday evening in a head-on collision between 2 vehicles on Route 70 in the north at the entrance to the town of Tamra. Police had originally suspected the incident was a hit-and-run accident and put up roadblocks to search for the driver. But after traffic police examined the scene, they determined that no additional vehicles were involved. And now to news that's literally out of this world. Astronomers are preparing to launch one of the most extensive searches for alien life far beyond the solar system. And no, it's not science fiction, but an actual project being funded by Russian Jewish philanthropist and physicist Yuri Milner, who recently announced the Extraterrestrial Initiative. Ellen Diorfeva has that story.
Russian Jewish billionaire Yuri Milner is teaming up with a list of acclaimed scientists, including the renowned physicist Stephen Hawking, for a project that is out of this world. Milner's Breakthrough Prize Foundation will provide $100 million in funding over the next 10 years in search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The mission will hopefully be accomplished using new state-of-the-art radio telescopes to track some 1 million of the closest stars and galaxies in search for signs from outside the Earth. The project is set to begin its observations as early as next year. Milner also plans to open the project to the public by providing other scientific minds from down here on Earth access to data collected and enabling them to share their input.
Today we are launching the most comprehensive search program ever. Just in one day, Breakthrough Listen will collect more data than a year of any previous search. The scope of our search will be unprecedented.
The search for extraterrestrial intelligence has a history of over 50 years. The first attempt to hear a sign from outside the universe was made in 1960 by Frank Drake, who is going to be one of the leaders of this project. Stephen Hawking's participation in the initiative took many by surprise. The theoretical physicist usually spoke out against attempts to contact extraterrestrial civilizations. That's why this time around the scientists will only try to look for the signals without dispatching any messages from Earth. However, Milner is one step ahead. He's already announced an international competition with a prize pool of $1 million for creating the best message that could potentially be sent sometime in the future.
Mankind has a deep need to explore, to learn, to know. We also happen to be sociable creatures. It is important to us to know if we are alone in the dark.
This is Ellen Zarafeeva for IBA News.
The Israeli swim team held an open training session yesterday at Wingate Institute.